I know that you're a bit put off by Simon Goodwin's comments about Finn McGuinness, but you know what? He is a defensive coach. He loves to coach that side of the ball, and that is exactly where I'm going to start. Now, defence qualifies and defence wins finals. There's been a lot of talk about how sexy offences can be and how much we like to move the ball. But the teams that have defended best are the teams who've qualified, and they're the teams that are coming hardest at the point into the season. And Goodwin was happy with his charges. Melbourne have been the seventh best team in terms of win-loss. So they're 8-5 in those 13 games, but their defence has been consistent. So they've been a top 3, top 2 defence the whole way along. The sides I want to highlight, Sydney, Carlton and GWS, they're the ones that are up, that have got the best win-loss in the last 12, 13 weeks. Each of those teams have improved their defence by 2 to 3 goals. So Sydney have gone from 14th best D to 5th, Carlton 6th to 1st. First best D in that time, in the last 13 weeks. That includes 4 losses before they went on their 9 wins in a row.
Remember what he said when they were going through that losing stretch?
Make no mistake, we are a defence-first team and we need to get that right.
That's what he said.
Loved it that he put his stake in the ground and that he's been able to follow through since. GWS are the other one. They've improved. They've improved by 3.5 goals defensively. Now, Sam Taylor comes back into the side. They build it from the back. They're playing with some dare and rebounding, but it comes from really solid defence. And have a look at St Kilda. St Kilda are a side that have been able to hang around, stay competitive, make the most of what they've got based on a really solid defensive list and a defensive plan. Now, they've gone from the best D to the 4th in that time, so they've come off a little bit, but they haven't been a Richmond, they haven't been an Essendon, they haven't even been a Geelong who've dropped off defensively a little, and they haven't been an Adelaide who have been high-scoring teams that have left the game in shootouts. So the sides that have defended best are the sides that have qualified. They've earned their opportunity and they go in great shape. They're going to be hard to beat in September.
About on that theory about the top 4 and where they sit, in particular the Pies, and how you read their defensive drop-off?
Yeah, well, I think that has to be attributed a little to Darcy Moore and Dacos, although over a longer period of time now. So, and they are my next port of call. The Pies, and we'll go to them straight away. So the Pies, they're going to need to flick a switch. So my second one for this morning, they're going to need to flick a switch when they get to September. And Craig McRae and I think the people down at Collingwood are semi-aware of that compared to where they were 4-6 weeks ago, that they're going to have to find a way when they get to September. They haven't performed well. They've lost 3 of their last 4. Their defence has dropped off from being second best in the first half to 9th at the moment, so they're gettable. Some of it is personnel related, some of it is pressure related. But I thought on the weekend, Quainer on Cameron, Quainer looked as unsure as we've seen him for a long time. Frampton didn't look as damaging as a Darcy Moore would from an intercept marking perspective. Murphy, copped a few whacks and saw Ryan got knocked out. So, and then you've got the run of Markov and Noble. They didn't quite come off the back as strong a defence. So the game looked like it was unpacked a little bit. We could be seeing Collingwood going into a qualifying final with 5 or 6 changes. Moore, Dacos, McCreary are going to be minimums. Maybe Hill and maybe to go, depending on whether they're selected into this week. So the Pies are going to have to flick a switch, but I wouldn't want to be coming up against them fresh with the hunger that Craig McRae's talking about. So whether it's Melbourne or whether it's Port, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Midfield looks pedestrian at the moment. Midfield looks a little bit slow. And they've definitely lost the aura that they had where, this team comes from anywhere to win. There's now a clear blueprint on how you can get after them. I understand the personnel issues, but, they feel more vulnerable than what they have in a long time.
Absolutely.
And whether you can flick a switch or not, you probably wouldn't put it past them. I think they probably can, but it's a big ask. And we know how important form is leading into the finals, and they've lost that.
History is against them because they've lost. Losing these couple of games into the finals. The last 10 years, the eventual premier has not lost any more than 1 game in their last 4,
let alone
in
by
the home
100
and away.
points.
So So that it's definitely been an issue, and it's something that the Pies are going to have to buck the trend to be able to compete as well and win the way they have throughout most of the year. Third for me is Charlie Curnow. It's a little bit of a mea culpa for me, to be honest. His performance over the last sort of 10 or 12 weeks has been huge. Must admit, when he was leading the Coleman halfway through the year, I thought he's been a flashy player, but he hasn't been as brilliant as the number one player in the competition you would expect him to be, and some had touted that. I didn't see that, but I definitely see it now. I think he's gone to another level again. You're seeing him play multiple roles. I think he's really there's plenty of players at Carlton that are doing the right thing, but I think this guy is the cream on top, and his performance on the weekend was huge. 5 goals without
flat.
A result, without sort of reply. But then Curnow comes in, they get going, and he goes bang, 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 bang. 4 goals in the second quarter. When the game needs to be won, he drops in behind the play and takes that mark in the goal square at the end. He drops to his knees at the end, and it just looked to me like it's just a further validation that what Carlton are building is based on the right stuff. It's work ethic, it's work rate, there's camaraderie. You're not reliant on talent, but then when you've got the base right, then the talent can shine, and we've definitely seen that at Carlton over the last 12 weeks.
It was as good a leadership performance as I've seen. I said over the weekend, he kicked the first goal 40 points down, and he's just said, give us something. And he's motioned to his teammates, come on, You can almost say he says, get up. And then he kicks the second soon after. Then he set up always with that laser from 70. His field kicking has been a big improvement. So the leadership aspect, I didn't know he had in him, and I was so impressed. It's one of the best and most important individual performances I've seen, and the Blues fans and his teammates can thank him because they turned up to that game flat, and he almost got them out of jail. I think it's an excellent point. Should we move on to the Dogs?
Yes, mate. So the Dogs' form has been woeful, and the loss on the weekend was nothing that anyone had anticipated. The Bulldog supporters must be scratching their heads. The players must be, looking sideways, trying to work out what's going on. And Bevo himself hasn't really been able to pull this group together to get the best out of themselves. But he did speak after the game about what he said to his players post-match. There's times in a coaching career where you can say the right words, but they don't resonate. And I fear that we might be looking at that.
Were they the right words?
Well, I think that they are the right words. I assume they are the right words. There needs to be optimism. There's still a finals berth to be gained next week, and you're taking on a banged-up Cats down at their home deck, and you're the only team that's outside the 8 that can put themselves back in. So there is optimism. There's something to be earned. There's something to be gained here. But it seems like it's a bit of a fait accompli, doesn't it?
Yep.
Whether it's not this week or the first week of finals, that they're not going to be able to get themselves up for it. But the energy of the coach is not quite right. We heard him in the pre-match talking about being tentative, being a bit on edge. And the energy he spoke about is exactly what seems to be missing from the Dogs. They lose Libba, who's a bit of a talisman for him. He's out concussed, so he's missed that. He comes back in, that could make a difference. But when you couldn't look after Tim Kelly through the middle, you couldn't look after Jamie Cripps in front of the ball, and these are guys that haven't been given this leeway for the entire year, haven't had the team around them to be able to find their best, but they find the Eagles on a rare day on. They win contested ball by 12, but I thought they've looked flaky on the outside. Now they look flaky on the inside as well. Like this weekend, they looked flaky on the inside. So they got a lot of working out to do for season 2023, let alone beyond.
I've got a bit more to say about the Dogs very shortly, and we'll hear from Luke Beveridge a little bit more in a matter of moments. Your last point is the biggest issue of the weekend.
Yeah, everyone's going to have their say on this, aren't they? So it's a review, big boo-boo. And it was great to look. I thought it was good for Gill to front this because there was no other way. It was so obvious that it needed the big brass to come out and have his say, and that's pretty much the way it happened. The one thing that hasn't been spoken about is we can't change the decision We can't change the goal and therefore overturn the outcome of the match because there was still a minute to play.
Yep.
When Ben Keys kicked the goal and 3 or 4 of his teammates got across there, it was pretty hard for Adelaide to defend or to use their bodies to defend Sydney's rebound.
5 down. So they were celebrating with the crowd.
Well, they were. Now, is that error is somewhat on the players because you need to be ready to play, but they're celebrating what they believe was a goal.
Which it was.
Because it was a goal. So if it's compromising the result, well, then didn't that poor decision or non-decision then compromise the rebound of Sydney, who went from one end of the field to the other end? And as you know, when there's a game within a goal, territory is key, because it changes the way that you defend and what you can do behind the ball. And Adelaide could have lost an opportunity there. Not only have they not got the decision for the goal and go back to centre bounce, but they haven't had the opportunity to go and defend their territory either.
Yep.
So on 2 levels there, they've missed out.
They're not without blame, Adelaide, so they're clearly they've been hard done by here. But they did kick 4 goals 8 in the last quarter. They kicked 2 goals 5 the previous week. Their inaccuracy has cost them at least 4 or 5 times this year. They've had 4, 5, 6 opportunities to get themselves into a pretty good position inside the 8, and they have failed to do that. So you don't want to take their responsibility away from the way that their season's played out.
And Matty Nix said exactly that.
They've had opportunities, but I mean, there's 2 separate issues. This was the wrong thing. I get a bit frustrated. We were confusing a couple of things. It's not the technology on this instance, which has rightly been criticised before. This had nothing to do. This had nothing to do with the technology. It was just the umpire's decision to back himself in and not use the technology. So that has been, I guess, confused in all of this. Tom Morris is here with the good oil. Let's start with a nasty incident on Saturday night.
Yeah, the good news for Jack Ziebell is he's out of hospital and in good spirits. While his injury was fairly horrific at the time, according to an eyewitness I spoke to, ultimately it's just a broken nose and he will be okay. And there's nothing more long-term. He will require surgery the next week or so when the swelling goes down, but other than that, there's nothing more long-term. The bad news is Victoria Police are yet to catch the culprits, and there's 3 of them who fled the scene immediately. This is how it played out in a chronological order. So at 1 a.m, Ziebell was told there was an altercation outside involving a couple of his teammates. Ziebell left his wife to briefly go outside the front of the Osborne in South Yarra. There, in full view of a long line and lots of people, he was set upon by 3 men who had previously been rejected entry at that same venue. He was also, the information he was given initially about being an altercation outside was also wrong. So he'd gone outside and there was nothing happening. Ziebell was punched in the chin by 1 and then again in the face before falling face first into the concrete. There was blood everywhere. There's still blood there if you actually go to the Osborne on the side of the road. I haven't seen the CCTV footage, but I can tell you this morning it's been provided to police, and last night I spoke to one person who has seen it. It's been described as horrible and completely unambiguous. The footage is very clear what happened. Now, whether this is a case, as has been suggested to me, of mistaken identity, i.e. the culprits thought Ziebell was someone he wasn't, regardless, it's just terrible. And let's hope that that footage leads to the police making an arrest in the near future, because apparently it's completely clear that what happened and unambiguous.
When you look at some of the horrific events that have happened with instances like this,
David Hooks comes to mind.
I know. I mean, just so fortunate that he will be okay. But yeah, let's hope they get those people, because it'd be a significant jail term, you would think, with the new laws around coward punches. So? I would have thought. And people at the Osborne and you know, the owner of the Osborne hopes that that is the case, because they're deeply embarrassed that this happened outside their pub, even though it wasn't necessarily their fault. Why do we continually talk about Dustin Martin's future?
I want to put a halt to it right now. I want to put a pause on it, Bucks and Kane. So this is where things are at, and I've made quite a few calls on this over the weekend. Firstly, Damien Hardwick is not pushing for Dustin Martin and will not push for Dustin Martin in this year's trade period. He'd prefer to come in, have a look at the list, assess what they've got, and build from the ground up, or look at the young players and the academy prospects. Secondly, there's conflicting reports, but my strong understanding is that Dustin Martin is due to make between $1.4 and $1.5 million next year. It's a heavily back-ended contract, as we know. The Suns can't afford that and will not jeopardise their list strategy in order to fit Dustin Martin in, who's going to be 33 next June. Thirdly, Brendan Gale is on the record at least a couple of times as saying Richmond won't trade him. Now, sometimes, Bucks, as you know, and Kane, officials come out and say that players won't be traded, like Fremantle last year with Rory Lobb, and the player ends up getting traded because the private conversation doesn't reflect the public conversation as well. In this instance, they're all aligned. They don't want to trade him, and they've got no interest in trading him next year. The Tigers do not want to rebuild. They want to continue to push next season. They don't want to go back to the draft and start from the bottom.
Well, they can't go back to the draft.
No,
they've got no draft.
They've got no draft picks, and Dustin Martin is an important part of that. And also, they don't want to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for Dustin Martin to play somewhere else, especially when they believe that he can still be an important player for them next year. So I just want to put a pause on this whole conversation.
So if you hear anyone speculate about Dustin Martin's future, don't listen to it.
I'm saying people are putting two and two together, but not fully understanding of the actual situation behind the scenes.
All right, Tigers fans, you can have your say on that. Speaking of Tigers fans, Damien Hardwick.
Yeah, just one more little thing on Dustin Martin. This is not to say it won't happen at the end of next year when he's a free agent and the deal can take place more clearly, but he will be 33 by then. So it's just too complicated right now.
All right. Damien Hardwick, will he be unveiled this week?
Yeah, that's going to be this week. He flew to the Gold Coast yesterday. He actually caught up with Justin Langer, coincidentally, at the airport on the way out, and Adam Simpson. If it's not today, surely it will be tomorrow or the next day. The one slight wriggle, complicating factor in this is that today is the AFLW season launch, so the AFL might say to the Gold Coast, can you wait until tomorrow? But it's going to be very soon, and everyone expects it to be done, a 5-year deal, and he'll have his feet under the table within a few days.
You gave us sorry, Bucks.
When do you think the genesis of that arrangement was?
Oh, it's such a great question, Bucks. I don't know for sure, but I suspect several months ago. Yeah.
Several months
ago. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's often a duck, isn't it, Bucks?
I think savvy football people, they don't. They look before they leap, put it that way.
Yeah. And there are connections at Gold Coast that can deal directly with Damien Hardwick, knowing that will never get out. You know, Mark Evans and Wayne Campbell and Paul Connors and Damien Hardwick, they can talk knowing that those conversations will always remain private.
And I'll add to that I think that where Richmond has been left by Damien Hardwick is in a very good position, and he's done the right thing for the Richmond Football Club the whole way along.
How could you say that? How could you say he's done the right thing if he's eyed off a job before he's left the current job, which he was contracted until the end of 2024?
No, because I think everyone has their time at an organisation, and I think his time had come, and I think he was more as aware of that as anyone else.
After he'd been a big influence in trading away all the picks and going for the now, and actually recruiting and building a list for the now, and leaving 9 weeks in and taking his good mate's job before he'd even left his job.
What I will say about that is that a coach, in regards to decisions for the future on a list side of things, that Blair Hartley and Tim Livingston, is it?
Yep.
They're the two that would have a far stronger influence on the list and what it looks like going forward than the senior coach.
You gave us a comprehensive contract news update last week, and basically everything you said came to fruition. What's the latest now?
So some trade nuggets here. So Bailey Smith, he's desperate to play midfield. If he stays at half forward, he won't be re-signing beyond 2024, and has every chance to consider his options this trade period. Rival clubs are acutely aware of the fact he wants to play midfield, and at the moment, well, yesterday he played 70% midfield, according to Daniel Hoyne, but this year he's played 44% midfield. So that's the main dimension about whether he's going to stay or leave in the next year or two. And that's the big watch on Smith, where he plays, half forward or midfield. Devon Robertson, West Coast has a 4-year deal in front of him. Now, he gained 25,000 Instagram followers on the weekend, Bucks, because he had his shirt off. Well, it could still be more on Friday night. Brisbane have a contract in front of him as well. He's from Perth. He's Darren Glass's nephew, and the Eagles were keen last year as well. So he's a watch for sure. And the other one is Finn McGuinness, Kane, your man. He's out of contract at the end of the season.
He doesn't want the ball.
He's staying at Hawthorn, most likely on a 2-year deal, which will take him to free agency at the end of 2025. Asava Radigali is part of this sort of key defenders merry-go-round alongside Tom Doedee, Ben Mackay as well. For Radigali, it's down to Hawthorn, Port Adelaide, or staying at Geelong. It won't be Essendon, though I believe the Geelong scenario is now least likely. I think he's going to Port or Hawthorn. They've both got good deals in front of him.
What sort of number a year do you think Radigali draws?
I don't know the dollar figure, but I think it's long-term, 5, 6, 7-year deal.
Which is frightening if you've watched him play in the last couple of weeks. Had a hammy injury, I think, on the weekend.
Yeah,
So
he might have played his last game for Geelong.
the two players that Port Adelaide are looking to bolster their backline is Zerk Thatcher, who had 9 kicked on him and was uncompetitive against Jesse Hogan, and Radagalia, who has just been horrific in the last couple of weeks and injured.
Who has attributes, but he hasn't proven himself in the role.
He can't.
I don't know what's the average. What's the average
400
player wage? So 400. So I'd reckon
more.
maybe 550.
No,
It'll be more than that. It'll be more than that.
And you're probably looking at 657 or something, aren't you?
And long term.
Wow.
Which is absolutely frightening. The key
Good
forwards
on the
market,
kid though.
Yeah, the key forwards market, I just want to put this on the agenda now because next year there's no key forwards out of contract. Mitch Georgiadis isn't quite a key forward, and we saw Riccardi re-signed. But next year, Aaron Norton, who can also play centre-half back, is out of contract. Ben King is out of contract. Aaron Cadman's out of contract. Logan McDonald is out of contract. Jamari Ugle-Hagan is out of contract. And Jesse Hogan is out of contract.
Wow.
So there is a dearth of key forwards next year that are coming to the end of their deals. Now, the big one is the Western Bulldogs. Norton, Bailey Smith, Tim English, and Jamari Ugle-Hagan. 4 of their stars out of contract next year, and 2 of those are free agents. So they're a big watch as well. How are they going to re-sign all those 4?
And that's why it's a big decision on the coach in the coming weeks, or perhaps when they review the season at the end of the year. I'll start on Friday night. Brisbane got it done against the Pies. I think it speaks volumes about Brisbane and the position that they are in to win a premiership. They should not have to fly to Victoria until grand final day. That's the reality of the win and what it did for them on Friday night. Their record at the Gabba is enormous. Probably be Port Adelaide in the first qualifying final. You would think they'll be too good for them with their list. A home prelim final, take you back to the early 2000s when it played there in a prelim final in 2002. It is a nasty place to play a prelim final at. Not that it's the team that had Brown and Black and Ackermanis and Lappin and that, but they're pretty talented Bucks. So Brisbane are in a terrific position and they're in ripping form. Let's move on to the Richmond game. They were challenged by North.
They were, and it's let's say it speaks volumes about the influence of Shai Bolton and Dustin Martin. So when they're midfielders and their high possession goal kickers get a hold of the game, well then that's what the result tells us. So Bolton kicked the 4, Martin kicked the 3. They shared almost 60 possessions between them, and that was really where it was at. Great send-off for Jack Rewalt and Trent Cotchin, and obviously the acknowledgement of Jack Siebel on the other side as well, but that was done extremely well. But Richmond, as I said, probably not as defensive focused under McWalter as they were under Hardwick, and that's been a bit of a shift, and it's opened them up a little bit, which has hurt them. But last week they didn't have Dusty, and they lost the game that they would have loved to have won, and it was just bad timing. But when he's in the side, they're a whole lot different. What about the Suns and the Blues?
Well, it says a lot about Gold. So we have not mentioned Gold Coast this weekend, and I'm looking at them. They're in 15th position. They kicked the first 5 goals of the game at home. They are flying. Their midfielders on top. Their forwards are
64 inside
to
50s.
rip the game apart, and they lose, and we just accept it. This footy club, I mean, I know we're talking about Hardwick and all that and the difference he's going to make, but what another wasted season it is for golf. 9 wins and 15th on the ladder. Many times they've started games well and had leads, and that's happened under Stephen King since Stewie Dew has gone. I just think they're such a disappointment. And once again, that was highlighted. Kick the first 5 and then find a way to lose that against the Carlton side that was flat at home. Shouldn't be accepted, but for whatever reason it is. So, to answer your question, it speaks volumes about that footy club and the lack of success and the reasons behind that. Let's move on to a 126-point loss, the biggest of Brad Scott's career.
Well, it speaks volumes of both clubs, but I've been positive on GWS for a long time, and that was great for them to reinforce their form. But it says a fair bit about Essendon and where they've got to. They just look tired. They look like their season has been run and done. And to put a performance like that up when the stakes are so high is unfathomable.
Yep.
They would be asking some pretty strong questions. I think there would be some stern words from Brad Scott and the coaching staff to the players as such. And it might actually be that they are absolutely spent and they've got nothing more to give. But
that's an excuse.
It is an excuse, but
Why would,
there was
why would
there
they
was
be
nothing
any more
there-
spent than any other team?
No, fair point. But there was just nothing from their leaders, and when the game was going away, it didn't look like there just wasn't enough. There wasn't enough from anyone, and GWS had their way and were allowed to do as they pleased, and it got worse and worse and worse. So, if you're a Bombers supporter, that would have been as hard a game to watch of any that you've ever seen. It's obviously the most significant loss for a long time for the Bombers, for Brad Scott himself, and there'd be some wounds that would be being licked at the moment, which is going to be hard to overcome and dust yourself off for Friday night. The Saints and the Cats, obviously a great win for the Saints at Marvel Stadium.
Yeah, so I think we've lauded. There's a stronger four-quarter performance I've seen from the Saints. I just want to acknowledge that before I move on to what I'm about to say. The big storyline out of it, though, is Geelong. So it speaks volumes to the reigning premier missing out on the finals altogether, like not even in contention. And we've been seduced by them and we've been reluctant to lose faith in them for obvious reasons. But being there and watching it live, they were fumbly, there were skill errors, they looked slow, their backline looked suspect. Their midfield group has been decimated repeatedly this year, like brutalised, and that's what they were doing to teams last year. So end of an era for the Cats. They are a great club and they will not take this lightly, and they will look at their list at the end of the year and they will find a way to not rebuild this group and to try and stay in contention. Now, whether they can do that and whether they can defy the evolution of being a successful side in this competition, I'm not sure, but they need to inject some speed, some energy, some life and some hunger back into a group that has clearly been reasonably satisfied with what they did last year, and that's okay. That happens. You get complacent, and there's no doubt there's been some complacency at Geelong. They've had their challenges, but yeah, that result was stark, and it speaks volumes about the fall from grace for the premiers of last year. Adelaide versus Sydney. But I don't know where you're going to go here.
Where do you go?
I don't know.
I mean, there's a tale of two halves. Swan's got 44 points ahead. So look, it probably. I think Sydney's form has been really consistently strong. That I think it says as much about Adelaide again as any. I think it speaks volumes to their best footy. I know that the result didn't go their way, and this is the fifth loss by under a goal or less, and we know how significant that can be. You know, you flip two or three of those, and against some really good opposition too, top four sides, most of them. And I think you'd have to say that Sydney are in top four form as well. So it would be a really frustrating position for Adelaide to be in, for their fans to be in and to see, because there's so much promise, there's so much positivity about going forward. But that's great to reflect on after the fact. But right now they'd be smarting, because their best footy is better than the position that they're in, and not playing finals this year. It'll be a bitter pill for them to swallow. I hope they go along with their coach's mantra of not pinning it on things that they're not in control of, because there's plenty that they are in control of that they can improve, and that's where their improvement will come from going forward.
This speaks volumes. The Western Bulldogs, the Melbourne and the Port Adelaide game still to come. We are up to the most shocking result of the weekend. It was West Coast beating the Western Bulldogs. Would you believe it? It speaks volumes about... Well, West Coast, and firstly, just I'm hedging my bets here, Bucks.
It's unlike you. Get off the fence, mate.
We're only
Splinters,
supposed
Cornes.
to say one team, but how can they produce that after what they've produced for the majority of the year? It speaks volumes about the character of that club, that they are capable of producing that, but haven't.
Whilst we're here, I don't know about you, but there's been quite a few West Coast supporters that have sort of shouted out to both of us for an apology for the last for what happened a couple of weeks ago. So I apologise that your coach didn't put a number behind the ball 2 weeks ago, and it was good to see that he was able to do that to get the win.
It was great to see that Adam Simpson heard the feedback that Bucks gave him
no,
on
I'm
our
not
show.
That. I'm not going to be that media guy.
I'm going to be that guy. It was great that Adam Simpson heard the feedback on our show. Realised that he made a mistake not to do what you should do at the dying stages of a game, what every coach would do, and a couple of weeks later learnt from that and then did what he should have done the first time. So that's great that he accepted that feedback. Speaking of the Western Bulldogs, this is just the writing on the wall has been there for the Western Bulldogs for a long time. For anyone that has watched it closely, there is serious issues at that football club, and there has been for a long time. And the fact that we get a result like this puts that under lights, and it shouldn't take a result like that to do so, but that's what this will do. Melbourne, I mean, they were challenged by Hawthorn, who have had an excellent year, but they got the win.
Look, Hawks didn't have Lewis, and then Newcomb came out late. And I would have loved to have seen that full Hawthorn side answer. But what I saw from Melbourne was just a reinforcement of what they've been able to build in the last 6 or 7 weeks. They've had that defensive capability. They took Brodie Grundy out of side. They changed their tall-small balance in front of the ball because they just weren't scoring. It was a brave decision. It has absolutely proven to be the right decision. They've lost Fritsch in that time, who was their best forward for the first half of the season. They've lost Petty since. They're trying things. They're getting, but all of the front third challenges that they've found and the dynamic where they're going smaller, all of that is. You're allowed to look at that because of getting the back 2/3 right. Now, they've done it without Oliver for a lot of the time. So for Oliver to get tagged, Petrarca's playing a slightly different role. I thought I saw Sparrow and Swallow and Rivers and these boys that have been really important parts of their team, but not as on a rung down from their stars. They were the ones that really were the ones that dug in and were competitive when Hawthorn had the run early. And they were the ones that said, "No, we're digging our heels in here. We're not getting pushed back any further." And then they came. And then Viney, Oliver sort of started going. Petrarca gets going. Gorn's doing what he's doing. Melksham, his role on Sicily was huge, and that was great coaching. I just thought Melbourne showed why they're going to be a handful against any opposition going forward. And they've had some really close wins. The game against Brisbane was a sliding doors moment, and they were on their way beyond that. And I see a real strength of conviction in what they put forward on the weekend, and it validates what they've been doing for the 6 or 7 rounds leading into this.
Well said. Port Adelaide eventual winners over Fremantle. It was a battle, and I enjoyed Gary's commentary on Fox Footy, a battle of the young midfield groups. Two of the better young midfields in the game. Sarong's been enormous. I think he had career high in clearances yesterday with 12. Brayshaw up against Butters and Rosie, and to a lesser extent, Horn Francis's first 3 quarters was excellent. And Port Adelaide got the chocolates. I mean, it was Hayes up against Jackson, who's had a good year. Hayes won hitouts. Port Adelaide win stoppage scores. They win clearances. And I think the difference between the two midfielders that I notice is their ball use. So Sarong and Brayshaw get a lot of it. They're poor ball users. And Brayshaw had a couple of opportunities in front of goal, easy ones that he missed, a couple of nasty turnovers. Their effort was there, Freo. The effort, you can't question that. And I think it was a good tune-up for Port to go away, big road trip, be challenged away from home. Some personnel issues again with Jonas and Burton going off. Freo lost O'Meara, so that hurt.
Tell you what was bizarre, just 40 inside 50s.
Yeah.
Port Adelaide. It was really low. Like, Freo now had 46, so it wasn't a high transition game. It was but it was a dour old game.
It was. It was stoppage or it was chip mark game, essentially. So it was a tale of sort of two aspects of the game. So if you couldn't score from stoppage, you're relying on very slow, methodical build-ups. Freo took a heap of uncontested marks early. Port Adelaide adjusted and shut that down. Yeah, really disappointing year for Freo. They should have done better. We all thought they were on the path to playing a prelim final this year on the back of what they achieved last year. So they've been, with Geelong, the biggest disappointment, I think, of the season in terms of where they are going to finish. And in the end, Port Adelaide did enough, and it was a nice hit out for them. A couple of wins in a row, which has been strong leading into finals.
I've got to call myself out for speaks volumes. I think I've got Alzheimer's. I mentioned Sparrow and Swallow, and I've already been picked up for it. So I don't know where I was going with that one. And the other one is Shea Bolton. I nearly every time I say his name, I nearly decide not to say his first name because I've got Shea in my head. So my apologies to the Richmond.
The spelling of it is confusing. But
and the Melbourne
show.
guys, yeah.
I'm
a pretty basic bloke. I am, and the more talking you do, the more likely you are to make mistakes.
I didn't even notice the sparrow and swallow.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice it either. I didn't pick it up on it. So
it's just these little things. It's capital ALZ. I'm halfway there.
He was then put as sub before the bounce. The question without notice is you: is that a shocking message to send to the standards of the footy club that you're selecting a player that can't play 120 minutes, Bucks?
No, because it's horses for courses, and I think every coach is looking for their best sub player, and it needs to be an impact player, and maybe Jake Stringer, at his best, becomes the perfect substitute player to be able to play that role. And there is a question around what it takes to play 85% of game time in modern footy, and you need to be at a certain athletic capacity. And Jake Stringer, let's be honest, has never been in the top echelon. He's probably been in the bottom 10 or 20% of athletes that have actually played the game. But then again, he's a power athlete. He's not endurance. He's not up and back.
So if it were me, and it's not, but I would say if you're not ready to play, this is Jake Stringer, highly paid player at the footy club. Go and train and get yourself in a state where you can actually compete for 120 minutes before you would even think about picking him. I think that's gifting to a game to a player who doesn't deserve it.
Well, Brad Scott, you lauded him for making this call early when Stringer didn't come back in the side, was forced when Essendon were going well. Yeah, I still think that both decisions can be right, and you can't look at the result of the team and say that decision is a sign of either that you're making good decisions or poor decisions. I don't believe you can go that deep.
I wonder why they trying to play, I guess, mind games, naming him and then making him the sub, which backfired as well. I feel like
nothing worked.
I feel like I've hogged questions without notice. Have you got
one? Well, who I was talking about with coming into buck stops here with Charlie Curnow, who are the best 5 players in the competition right now? And obviously, who do you reckon is going to make their mark in finals?
In no particular order.
Yep.
I would go with Dacos, Curnow, Toby Green, Marcus Bontempelli, and I'm going to put Zach Butters in there. But that's showing no love to any of the key defenders, and I apologise to that. It's showing no love to the ruckman, but I don't think there's a ruckman in that conversation at the moment. What about you?
No, I'd agree with that. I still think Darcy Moore is in and Stephen May, those intercept defenders, and James Sicily. So put those 3 guys in together. I think they are 3 of the most influential players on results, and I think that'll be proven. That'll be proven going forward. Not obviously Sicily. I'd love to see. I really look forward to the day we see Hawthorn back in the finals to see what he can do, challenged with that stage. But I think Moore and May will have a fair bit to say in what's going on in September.